I never thought I'd be the kind of person who got erased. Not from a photograph, not from a story, and certainly not from my own mother's will. But that's exactly what happened when I turned 68 years old and my mother passed away in a nursing home in Springfield, Missouri, surrounded by people I barely recognized as my own family anymore. My name is Margaret Ellen Holloway, though everyone used to call me Maggie. I'm 73 now, and this story begins 5 years ago, on a Thursday morning in March when I received a phone call that changed everything. "Mrs. Holloway?" The voice on the other end was professional, detached. "This is Stevens and Associates law firm. We're calling regarding the estate of Dorothy and Holloway, my mother." My heart dropped into my stomach like a stone into a well. "When?" I managed to whisper. "3 days ago, ma'am. The family requested we wait to contact you until after the arrangements were made." 3 days. She'd been gone 3 days, and no one told me. Not my brother Richard. Not my sister Patricia. Not a single one of my nieces or nephews who I'd bought birthday presents for or babysat, loved like my own. I hung up and stared at the phone in my hand like it was something foreign, something from another world. The morning light coming through my kitchen window in my small house in Tucson seemed too bright, too normal for what I'd just heard. The coffee I'd been drinking had gone cold. I hadn't seen my mother in 2 years. Not because I didn't want to, but because every time I tried to visit, there was a reason I couldn't. Richard said she was too tired. Patricia said she was having a bad day. The nursing home staff, who I later learned had been given instructions, told me visiting hours had changed or that Mom had requested no visitors that day. I should have fought harder. That's what I tell myself now, in the quiet moments before sleep. I should have made a scene, demanded my rights, called a lawyer back then. But I didn't, because I loved my mother, and I thought I was respecting her wishes. I thought maybe she was angry with me about something, and I kept replaying our last real conversation, looking for clues about what I'd done wrong. The funeral was on a Saturday. I drove 17 hours straight from Tucson to Springfield, stopping only for gas and coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. I wore the black dress I'd bought for my husband Tom's funeral 8 years earlier. The one that still smelled faintly of mothballs no matter how many times I washed it. The funeral home was one of those old Victorian houses converted into a business, with too much dark wood and silk flowers that looked dusty even from a distance. I walked in 10 minutes before the service started, my hands shaking, my heart hammering against my ribs. That's when I saw it. The memorial board stood near the entrance, covered with photographs from Mom's life. There she was as a young bride with my father in 1952. There she was holding a baby Richard. I knew from the date written below. There was another of her in the backyard of our old house on Maple Street, laughing at something off camera. There she was at Patricia's wedding, wearing that awful peach dress she'd insisted matched the bridesmaid gowns. I scanned every photo, my eyes moving faster and faster. Mom at the beach, Mom at Christmas, Mom with her grandchildren, Mom at her 75th birthday party. I wasn't in a single one. It wasn't that they'd chosen photos from before I was born or after I'd moved away. I could see the edges where pictures had been cropped, the awkward spacing that suggested someone had been edited out. In one photo from what I recognized as Thanksgiving 1998, Mom's arm was extended around empty space, her hand resting on an invisible shoulder. My shoulder. They had erased me. "Maggie." Patricia's voice came from behind me, and I turned. My sister looked older than I remembered, her face pinched and tight. She was wearing a black suit that probably cost more than my mortgage payment, with pearls that had belonged to our grandmother, pearls that, according to family tradition, should have gone to the eldest daughter. Me. "Patricia." My voice sounded strange, hollow. "What's going on? Why wasn't I told she died?" She glanced around nervously, then took my elbow and steered me into a corner, away from the other mourners who were beginning to arrive. Her grip was tighter than necessary. "We tried to call," she said, but her eyes didn't meet mine. "You must have changed your number. I've had the same number for 15 years. Well, regardless, you're here now." She released my arm and smoothed her skirt. "The service is about to start. Richard is sitting in the front row. There's a seat at the back." "A seat at the back?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Patricia, she was my mother too. Maggie, please don't make a scene. Not today. Where am I in these photos? I gestured to the memorial board. Why have I been cut out of every single picture? Patricia's jaw tightened. Mom made certain decisions in her final years about how she wanted to be remembered. We were honoring her wishes. Her wishes? To pretend I don't exist? You weren't here. Patricia's voice turned sharp, like it used to when we were children and she was telling on me for something I didn't do. You moved to Arizona and started your own life and left the rest of us to take care of her. You weren't here for the hospital visits, the medication schedules, the middle of the night phone calls. You weren't here, Maggie. The words hit me like a slap. I tried to visit. Every time I tried, someone told me the service is starting. Patricia turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor like a countdown. I stood there, frozen, as people filed past me into the chapel. Some of them I recognized, Mom's friends from church, neighbors from the old street, distant cousins. A few nodded politely, but most looked away quickly, like I was contagious. I found a seat in the last row, next to a woman I didn't know who kept crying into a tissue that smelled like lavender. The service was beautiful, I suppose. Richard gave a eulogy about Mom's strength and grace, her dedication to family, her love of gardening and crossword puzzles. He told a story about how she used to make chocolate chip cookies every Sunday, and half the congregation laughed wetly. I remembered those cookies. I remembered standing on a step stool in the kitchen, helping her measure flour, sneaking chocolate chips when she pretended not to look. I remembered the way she'd ruffle my hair with flurry hands and call me her little helper. Richard didn't mention me once. In his telling, Mom had 2 children, not 3. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief and nodded along to his words. After the service, there was a reception in the church basement, with egg salad sandwiches and fruit punch served in small plastic cups. I stood in the corner, holding a cup I hadn't touched, watching my family accept condolences from people I used to know. That's when I saw my nephew, Patricia's oldest boy, Jason. He was 32 now, a lawyer like his father, wearing a suit that probably cost even more than his mother's. He'd been a sweet kid once, the kind who brought me dandelions and called them flowers. Jason, I said as he walked past. He stopped, and for a moment, something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or recognition. Aunt Maggie, can you tell me what's happening? Please? He glanced around, then lowered his voice. It's not personal. It's just complicated. Complicated how? The will. There were questions about Mom's competency at the end, about who had influence over her. He shifted his weight. Look, I can't really talk about this. I'm actually representing the estate. You're... What? I have to go. I'm sorry. And he was gone, swallowed up by the crowd of mourners who had actually been allowed to mourn. I left before the reception ended. I drove to a motel off the highway, one of those places with thin walls and a neon sign that buzzed all night. I lay on top of the covers in my funeral dress and stared at the ceiling, trying to understand how this had happened. How did I become invisible in my own family? The answer came 2 days later, when I received a certified letter from Stevens and Associates. Inside was a copy of my mother's will, dated 18 months before her death. She'd left everything, the house, the savings, the family jewelry, every single thing she owned, to Richard and Patricia. The will stated explicitly that I was to receive nothing, citing my abandonment of family responsibilities and my decision to prioritize personal interests over familial duty. I read those words over and over until they blurred on the page. Abandonment. Personal interests. I'd moved to Tucson because Tom got a job offer he couldn't refuse, teaching engineering at the University of Arizona. We talked about it as a family. Mom had said she understood, that she wanted me to be happy, that Springfield would always be home when I needed it, or at least, I thought she'd said that. Now I wasn't sure what had been real and what had been carefully constructed lies, but something about the will felt wrong. The language was too formal, too legal. Mom had been a high school English teacher, yes, but she wrote like she spoke, warm, rambling, full of affection and folksy wisdom. This read like it had been drafted by an attorney and signed by someone who barely understood what they were signing. I thought about Mom's last years, the way Richard and Patricia had been so protective of her, so controlling of who could visit and when. I thought about the nursing home staff who turned me away, the phone calls that never got returned, the birthday cards I'd sent that were never acknowledged, and I got angry. Not the hot, explosive kind of anger, but the cold, determined kind that settles into your bones and doesn't let go. I hired a lawyer. Her name was Diana Reeves, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and eyes that didn't miss anything. She listened to my story in her cramped office in Tucson, taking notes in a yellow legal pad. "Did your mother have dementia?" she asked when I finished. She had some memory issues, yes. But she knew who I was. The last time I spoke to her on the phone, 2 years ago, she remembered a story from my childhood about a stray cat I'd tried to bring home. She laughed about it. "But you weren't able to visit?" They always had an excuse. Diana tapped her pen against the pad. "Mrs. Holloway, what you're describing sounds like potential elder abuse, financial exploitation. If your siblings isolated your mother and manipulated her into changing her will, can we prove that? Maybe. We need to subpoena records, medical documents, visitor logs from the nursing home, phone records. We need to demonstrate that your mother lacked the mental capacity to make these decisions, or that she was under undue influence." She paused. "It won't be easy, and it won't be cheap, and it will destroy whatever's left of your relationship with your siblings." I thought about Richard's eulogy, how he'd erased me from Mom's story. I thought about Patricia's cold voice telling me I hadn't been there. I thought about being cropped out of every family photograph like an unwanted stranger. "There's nothing left to destroy," I said. The legal battle took 3 years. 3 long, expensive, emotionally devastating years of depositions and hearings and late-night phone calls with Diana going over medical records and financial statements. I sold Tom's car, the one I'd been keeping in the garage like a shrine. I took out a loan against my house. I stopped going to church because I couldn't stand the pitying looks from people who'd heard about the greedy daughter fighting over her mother's estate, but I kept going, because it wasn't really about the money. It was about the truth. Diana was brilliant. She subpoenaed the visitor logs from the nursing home and discovered that I'd been placed on a restricted list, meaning staff were instructed not to let me visit without specific approval from Richard or Patricia. Approval that was never granted. She found emails between my siblings and their attorney, discussing how to handle the Maggie problem and secure Mom's assets for the family. She found the earlier version of Mom's will, the one from 5 years before she died, where everything was split equally between the 3 of us. That will had been changed shortly after Mom was moved into the nursing home, during a period when her medical records showed she'd been prescribed heavy doses of anti-anxiety medication that affected her cognitive function. Most damning of all, Diana found a recording. One of the nurses at the facility, a young woman named Tracy who felt guilty about what had happened, had kept a voicemail Mom had left on her personal phone. In it, Mom asked Tracy if she'd seen me, said she missed me, wondered why I never came to visit anymore. "Richard says she's too busy," Mom said in the recording, her voice thin and confused. "But that doesn't sound like my Maggie. My Maggie always comes back." I listened to that voicemail in Diana's office and cried for the first time since the funeral. Not quiet tears, but the kind of sobbing that comes from somewhere deep and broken. Diana let me cry, pushing a box of tissues across her desk, and didn't say a word until I was finished. The case went to trial in the fall. The courtroom was in the same building where I'd gotten my marriage license 46 years earlier, a coincidence that felt like the universe had a sense of irony. Richard and Patricia sat on one side with their lawyer, a man in an expensive suit who kept checking his phone. I sat on the other side with Diana, wearing the same black dress from the funeral because it was the nicest thing I owned. The trial lasted for days. Medical experts testified about Mom's mental state. The nursing home staff were questioned about the visitor restrictions. Diana played the voicemail for the judge, and I watched Richard's face turn red and Patricia stare at her hands. Their lawyer argued that I had been absent by choice, that I'd moved across the country and started a new life and couldn't be bothered to care for my aging mother. He painted me as selfish, As someone who only showed up when there was money involved, Diana presented a different story. She showed how I'd tried to visit, how I'd been systematically excluded and lied to. She demonstrated that Mom's cognitive decline had been exploited, that the will had been changed when she was most vulnerable, that my siblings had engaged in what the law calls undue influence. The judge, a woman in her 60s who reminded me of my high school principal, listened to everything with an expression that gave nothing away. When the testimony was finished, she took 2 weeks to make her decision. I spent those 2 weeks in a state of suspended animation, unable to eat or sleep properly, jumping every time the phone rang. Diana told me she felt good about our chances, but that nothing was certain in law. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my garden, pulling weeds that didn't really need pulling, when my phone buzzed. "We won," Diana said. No preamble, no build-up. "The judge ruled in your favor. She's invalidating the contested will and reinstating the earlier version. She also ordered Richard and Patricia to pay your legal fees, plus damages for emotional distress." I sat down right there in the dirt, among the tomato plants that needed staking, and I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh exactly. It was more like the sound you make when you've been holding your breath for so long you'd forgotten what air tasted like. The house on Maple Street, the one I'd grown up in, the one where Mom had taught me to make chocolate chip cookies and where Dad had died of a heart attack in his favorite armchair, that house was now 1/3 mine. So was the savings account Mom had carefully built over 40 years of teaching. So were the pearls that Patricia had worn to the funeral. But more than that, the judge had included something in her ruling that Diana said was unusual. She'd written that the evidence suggested a pattern of deliberate isolation and manipulation, that my siblings had betrayed not only their sister but their mother's true wishes and the fundamental bonds of family. She'd stated, in official legal language, that I had been wronged. Someone had finally said it. Someone with authority had looked at what happened and said, "This was not right." I thought that would be the end of it. I thought I'd feel victorious, vindicated, whole again. And I did, for a little while. But victory in court doesn't heal everything. It doesn't erase the years of pain, the nights of wondering what I'd done wrong, the funeral where I sat alone in the back row. Richard and Patricia never spoke to me again. The court ordered them to cooperate with dividing the estate, and they did, but only through their lawyers. When the house was sold, I got my check in the mail with no note, no acknowledgement. The jewelry was divided according to Mom's original will, and the pearls arrived in a box with no return address. I thought about keeping them. Those pearls. They'd been in our family for 3 generations. But every time I looked at them, I saw Patricia wearing them at the funeral, saw the memorial board with my face cropped out of every picture. I sold them. I used the money to set up a scholarship at the community college in Springfield, in Mom's name, for returning students who wanted to finish their education later in life. People who, like me, had to fight for things that should have been theirs all along. Jason, my nephew the lawyer, sent me an email about 6 months after the trial ended. It was short, formal, the kind of message you'd send to a client, not an aunt. But in the last line he wrote, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. You were right. It wasn't much, but it was something." A small crack in the wall of silence my family had built around me. I'm 73 now, and I live alone in my small house in Tucson. I still tend my garden, though the Arizona heat makes it harder every year. I still make chocolate chip cookies on Sundays, using Mom's recipe that I know by heart. And I still sneak chocolate chips when no one's looking. Even though there's no one here to pretend not to notice, sometimes I think about forgiveness. People say it's important, that holding on to anger will poison you. Maybe that's true, but I think there's a difference between forgiveness and letting people pretend nothing happened. I'm not angry anymore, not really. But I'm not pretending either. I keep one photograph from Mom's funeral. The only one I took. It's not from the memorial board. I couldn't bear to look at those erased images. It's a picture I snapped on my phone of the church where the service was held. It's just a building, brick and stained glass, and a white steeple reaching toward a cloudy sky. Nothing special. But I was there when that photo was taken. I was standing on the sidewalk in my black dress with mothball smell, holding a cup of fruit punch I never drank, grieving a mother I loved and a family I'd lost. The photo doesn't show me, but I know I existed in that moment. I was there. They tried to erase me, but they couldn't. Not really, because I'm the one who remembers everything. I remember the good times before it all went wrong, the Christmas mornings, the summer cookouts, the way Richard used to make me laugh by doing impressions of our teachers, the way Patricia and I would stay up late painting each other's nails and talking about our futures. I remember Mom's hands, always moving, always creating something, a quilt, a garden, a home. I remember, and that makes it real. Last week, I got a letter from Tracy, the nurse who'd saved Mom's voicemail. She's working at a different facility now, specializing in elder care and patient advocacy. She said my case had changed how she thought about her work, made her more watchful for signs of family manipulation and abuse. She said she wanted to thank me for fighting, because it had reminded her why she became a nurse in the first place. I wrote her back immediately. I told her she had nothing to thank me for, that she'd been the one with the courage to come forward when it would have been easier to stay silent. I told her to keep fighting for the people who can't fight for themselves, but the truth is, her letter meant more to me than the court victory, more than the money, more than Jason's brief apology, because it meant that something good had come from all this pain. Somewhere, someone's mother or father or grandmother might be protected because Tracy is paying attention. Somewhere, someone might not get erased. I think about my mother often. Not the confused woman in the nursing home who signed papers she didn't understand, but the woman from my childhood who taught me to be strong, to stand up for what's right, to never let anyone make me small. I like to think she'd be proud of me, that wherever she is, she knows I fought for her even when she couldn't fight for herself. On Sundays, when I make the cookies, I sometimes talk to her. I tell her about the garden, about the scholarship students who send me thank you notes, about the small, quiet life I've built in this desert place far from home. I tell her I'm okay, that I survived, that they didn't win, and sometimes, when the light comes through the kitchen window just right, when the cookies are almost done and the house smells like chocolate and sugar and memory, I can almost hear her voice. Not the thin, confused voice from the voicemail, but the strong voice from before, from when I was small and the world was simpler. That's my girl, she says. That's my Maggie. And I smile. Because I am. I'm hers. And she's mine. And no will, no legal document, no cropped photograph can ever change that. I keep a box in my closet with things I've saved over the years. Letters Mom wrote me when I first moved to Arizona. Birthday cards with her handwriting. A recipe card for those chocolate chip cookies, stained with butter and worn at the edges. And now, added to the collection, I have the judge's ruling printed and folded carefully, not because I need proof of my victory, but because sometimes, when the nights are long and the memories are heavy, I need to remind myself that the truth matters. That I mattered. That I was never really erased at all. I'm still here. And that's enough. The other day, I was at the grocery store, and I saw a woman with her elderly mother, the two of them laughing over something in the produce section. The mother's hand was on her daughter's arm, casual and affectionate, the kind of touch that speaks of a lifetime of love. I watched them for a moment longer than I should have. Long enough that the daughter noticed and gave me a puzzled look. I smiled and looked away, finishing my shopping, but I thought about that touch for the rest of the day. I thought about how easy it is to take family for granted, how quickly love can turn to obligation, obligation to resentment, resentment to cruelty, how the people who are supposed to protect you can become the ones you need protection from. But I also thought about Tracy, who risked her job to do the right thing, about Diana, who believed me when it would have been easier to take a simpler case, about Jason, who sent that brief email even though it probably cost him peace with his mother, about all the small acts of courage that added up to justice. Maybe that's what I've learned from all of this. That family isn't always blood. That home isn't always the place you came from. That sometimes being erased from the old story is what allows you to write a new one. My story didn't end at that funeral, in that back row, cropped out of all those photographs. It's still being written, here in this desert garden, in these Sunday cookies, in the scholarship that bears my mother's name. In every moment, I choose to keep living, keep loving, keep remembering the good alongside the bad. They tried to erase me. They failed. And every day I wake up in this small house. Every morning I step into my garden and feel the sun on my face. Every Sunday I measure flour and sneak chocolate chips. I prove them wrong. I am Margaret Ellen Holloway. I am 73 years old. I am a widow, a sister, an aunt, a gardener, a baker, a survivor. I am the keeper of memories, both bitter and sweet. I am the woman who fought back when it would have been easier to disappear. I am here, and I remember everything.